One moment, the Soviet submarine moves beneath the Arctic ice like a shadow. The next, it is gone. No radio call, no flare of panic, no trace on the surface. Then Western listening stations pick up something strange. Not a clear explosion, not a normal mechanical failure, just an anomaly, followed by a sudden, unnatural quiet. Almost immediately, rumors begin to spread. This boat was not only armed for war, it may have been carrying a nuclear cargo the Kremlin never planned to admit existed. Out in the North Atlantic, the Cold War is not fought with flags or speeches. It is fought in silence, under miles of black water, where a single submarine can shift the balance of power without ever being seen. By the late 1960s, Soviet boats are pushing farther from home. Ballistic missile submarines are built to threaten cities. Fast attack submarines are meant to hunt and to protect them. Their routes cut through the narrow gaps between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK, then out into the open Atlantic. NATO knows those choke points matter, so the West builds an invisible wall. SOSUS, a chain of underwater microphones laid across the ocean floor, listens for the low, steady signatures of propellers and reactors. But listening is only half the war. The other half is what nobody admits. Both sides operate inside a culture where even routine patrols are wrapped in secrecy, and mistakes are buried fast. When something goes wrong at sea, the first response is not a press release. It is denial, coded messages, and locked files. That is how accidents turn into rumors. And in the Cold War, rumors turn into weapons. This is where our mystery begins. A Soviet submarine does not come home. Some believe it was carrying a covert nuclear payload, one not listed in standard fleet declarations, not a normal patrol loadout, not something meant to be acknowledged. If that is true, then its disappearance is not just a loss. It is a secret that could never be allowed to surface. She does not vanish in one dramatic moment. First, she slips out of the normal pattern, quietly and deliberately, like someone trying not to be seen. Her last known movements begin the way many Soviet patrols did. She leaves port under tight control, then moves into open water where the ocean can hide almost anything. But this mission starts to look different fast. The routing is unusual. Instead of following the familiar lanes NATO expected, the submarine's track, based on later fragments from monitoring and intelligence, suggests a wider, less predictable arc. It is not a straight run to a patrol box. It is not the kind of path you choose for routine deterrence. It looks like a trip designed to avoid attention and to buy time. Communications tighten too. Soviet boats were never chatty. But on sensitive missions, the silence becomes its own message. Fewer transmissions, shorter bursts, less room for mistakes. Every signal is a breadcrumb, and NATO's listening posts are built to collect breadcrumbs. In the Cold War, radio discipline is not just procedure, it is survival. Then there is the cargo profile, what the mission seems to be carrying, and why that changes everything. The clues are indirect. They come from logistics, security posture, and later reporting. Not a neat public manifest. But the pattern points to something more than standard torpedoes and supplies. Special weapons, experimental material, possibly nuclear-related cargo that would never be admitted openly. The kind of load that turns a submarine from a warship into a moving political crisis. Out in the Atlantic, the mission becomes a cat-and-mouse game that never stops. NATO does not need to see the submarine to hunt it. They listen for it. They try to catch a signature. Propeller noise, machinery hum, a brief rise in speed that changes the sound. Patrol aircraft sweep likely routes. Surface ships drag sonar through cold water. And somewhere in the background, analysts keep updating the map. Where it could be, where it must be, where it cannot be. The Soviets know this. They do not just hide. They fight the search. They change depth. They change speed. They use the ocean itself. Layers of temperature and salt that bend sound and break tracking. They run quiet when they can. When they cannot, they try to confuse the picture. A good crew can make a submarine feel like a ghost. A great crew can make it feel like the wrong ghost. But the most dangerous part is not the chase. It is how little it takes to turn a secret mission into an international incident. A mechanical failure at the wrong time. Something as simple as a valve that sticks. A battery problem. A leak that spreads. A fire in a compartment where heat and smoke have nowhere to go. A collision in the dark with a ship that never knew it was there. Any one of those can force a submarine to surface, transmit, or call for help. And if the boat is carrying nuclear cargo, special weapons, or experimental material, then help is not just rescue. It is exposure. Because the moment that submarine breaks silence, the Cold War stops being theory. It becomes a live event with nuclear stakes in the middle of the ocean. Watched, interpreted, and misinterpreted by both sides. In that kind of pressure, one small failure is never just a failure. It is a spark. Most people stop at the surface of history, but you're still here. So if you want the parts they don't teach, the truths buried beneath time, consider subscribing and becoming part of those who chose to see it all. Now, let's continue. The first real proof does not come from a survivor. It comes from signals, cold, clipped messages that were never meant for the public. In the hours after the submarine goes silent, classified intercepts begin to stack up. Western listeners catch a sudden spike in Soviet naval traffic. The messages are short and urgent. Call signs repeat. The pattern looks less like routine patrol chatter and more like a search that started in panic. Then the posture changes. Soviet ships that normally stay on predictable routes begin moving with purpose. They tighten into a net. Aircraft appear where they should not be. Support vessels, including tugs, rescue ships, and specialized units, start heading toward the same patch of ocean. That shift is the tell. Whatever Moscow is dealing with, it is not a simple communications failure. And almost immediately, the theories harden into three competing possibilities. One is an internal accident, a fire, a battery explosion, a mechanical failure that cascaded too fast to control. Submarines are built to take punishment. They are also packed with systems that can kill a crew quietly. Smoke, toxic gas, flooding, and loss of power can take hold long before anyone outside knows there is a problem. Two is a collision, the kind neither side wants to admit. In the Cold War, submarines stalked each other in the dark. Sometimes they were close enough to hear propellers like footsteps. A bump at the wrong angle can tear open a hull, jam a control surface, or cripple a boat without leaving a clean, obvious signature. Three is a weapons incident. It is the most dangerous theory, and the one that changes everything. This submarine is not just a military asset. It is carrying something Moscow cannot afford to lose: secret nuclear cargo. If that cargo is damaged, or if a reactor system is compromised, the crisis stops being only about a missing crew. It becomes a contamination risk. It becomes a political risk. It becomes a trigger risk. Because the other side will see the search, read the movement, and start asking the same question. What exactly is the Soviet Navy trying to recover before anyone else finds it? The ocean is suddenly a crime scene with no witnesses. Both superpowers are reacting to the same fear without being able to say it out loud. Somewhere down in the black water, a Soviet submarine lies broken open, like a safe that will not stay shut. Once Moscow is sure of the wreck's position, the mission stops being search and rescue. It becomes a race. Soviet ships and support vessels push into the area and hold it, not with loud threats, but with presence. Radar, sonar, patrol patterns. A clear message to anyone listening: this site is not up for negotiation. Every hour matters, not because the hull is valuable, but because what might be inside it could change the balance of power. NATO, meanwhile, has its own problem. They need to know what is on the seabed, what kind of warheads, what kind of system, what kind of technology. They need answers without turning the ocean into a shooting gallery. So they watch, they listen. They try to confirm from a distance, using signals, movement, and the behavior of Soviet ships as clues. The more intense the Soviet response becomes, the more it points toward the worst case, and the worst case is simple to say and hard to face. Nuclear material on the bottom of the sea. A damaged submarine is one thing. A damaged nuclear package is another. If containment is compromised, if a warhead casing is cracked, if a reactor compartment is breached, if seawater is getting into places it should never reach, then the wreck is not just a military secret. It is a hazard. It is a political bomb sitting in silence, waiting for someone to touch it, move it, or even misread what it is. Now imagine the nightmare scenario both sides are trying not to say out loud. A foreign recovery team arrives first. A crane line goes down. Something comes up that was never meant to be seen. Or worse, something shifts, breaks, or leaks. In that moment, the story stops being about a lost submarine. It becomes a crisis with no clean exit. Accusations, denials, emergency deployments. Leaders forced to react in public to something they were never supposed to admit existed. So the sea turns into a standoff without a front line. Soviet forces tighten the perimeter. NATO tries to confirm the cargo without crossing the line that starts a war. And down below, the wreck just sits there, silent, damaged, and possibly armed, making every decision above it feel like a gamble with nuclear stakes. The sea does not just hide wrecks, it keeps secrets, and it reveals them on a delay. When the submarine did not come back, the first battle was not underwater, it was on paper. Families were told what they needed to hear, and not much more. Some were given careful, patriotic language about an accident at sea. Others heard quieter versions through back channels, hints that something far more sensitive had been on board, and that the state wanted the story to end before it began. In the Soviet system, a missing boat could be mourned. A missing boat with special weapons became a problem that could not be allowed to exist in public. Records were locked down, details moved into sealed files and restricted briefings. Official statements stayed vague. Sometimes the tone shifted depending on who was asking and when. Privately, there were acknowledgments that the loss was not just a human tragedy. It was a strategic incident. A sunken submarine could be mapped, studied, and exploited. And if it carried nuclear cargo, the ocean floor became a silent bargaining chip. So what likely happened to that cargo? In cases like this, there are only a few realistic outcomes. If the wreck was reachable and the risk was judged high, recovery would be attempted, quietly, with specialized ships, divers, and remote tools. Every step treated like a state secret. If the depth or condition made recovery too dangerous, the weapons could be left in place, with the site monitored and the story buried. And there is a third possibility that haunts every navy that moves nuclear material: partial loss, a damaged container, a separated component, something that shifted during the sinking, or later broke free as the hull decayed. Not a Hollywood loose nuke, but enough uncertainty to keep planners awake for years. The environmental consequences were the kind that do not explode. They seep. Even when a nuclear weapon does not detonate, the materials around it can corrode. Batteries, fuel, and reactor-related contamination, if a reactor was involved, can leak slowly into the water. The Soviet Navy, like others, often treated these risks as manageable compared to the political cost of admitting them. But the ocean does not care about classification stamps. Over time, a wreck can become a long-term pollution source and a long-term surveillance target. Strategically, the loss changed the map. A known wreck site becomes a point of interest for foreign intelligence, a place to listen, to photograph, to sample, and to learn how Soviet systems were built and how Soviet crews operated. It also becomes a pressure point in a crisis. If another confrontation flared, even the suspicion that an adversary was working near that wreck could trigger escalation. No one could be sure what was being taken or what was being planted. Inside the Soviet military, incidents like this forced hard changes, even if the public never heard about them. Special weapons transport procedures tightened. Custody rules became stricter. Communications and tracking for sensitive missions improved, because lost contact was no longer just a navigation problem. It was a national security emergency. Undersea crisis management also evolved. Faster search responses, clearer chains of command, more planning for the worst-case scenario where secrecy and safety collide. And that is the final cruelty of it. The crew vanished into the deep, but the submarine did not disappear. It stayed behind, an underwater tomb and a political ghost that could surface at any moment. The Cold War did not just hide secrets in files and bunkers. It hid them in the ocean, where a disaster can sink out of sight and still never truly disappear. That lost submarine became more than a wreck. It became a lesson in what secrecy can do to grief, turning tragedy into legend. And when the secret is nuclear, the weight does not stay on the seafloor. It lingers in policy, in ecology, and in memory for decades.